Glenn, if we add up the years, the professional years and the non-professional years of your life, how many years would you say you've pursued writing and screenwriting as a career?
I had about 25 years working, and I had about 18 before that struggling to get a job, to get work. So I'm really bad at math, but I think that's 40 something. Anyway, it's many decades.
And in the 40 years, you were still working even if you weren't making money. You were, I think we talked
Every
about it
day.
in our last interview.
Every day. It started from this, I liked doing creative work. And the more just doing it every day, trying to work on the work, work on the content of the work, working on the quality and the subject matter and just that stuff was the first task. And then eventually there's like, well, how do I get this out? How do I understand the market, all that? But it still comes from every day doing the thing, making something, writing something, trying to plot it out, trying to, whatever it is, doing some work every single day. That's been nonstop since I was in high school.
And you talked about in our last interview, which I believe was in 2021 or 2020-ish, around that time, that you were a temp
Yes.
and that it actually fit in quite well.
It didn't feel like it at the time, but it did, in fact. At the time, I kept thinking, I don't want to do this. I want to be, a movie writer. But in fact, it was like, the stories back in the 20th century of some writer who would bum around and work as a bartender and work on a ship and all those things, and then they would write their novels about that. That's sort of what it was like, except I was all in Manhattan, and I would go from job to job, and I would work at a textile company and then a pharmaceutical advertising company, and I was meeting a lot of people I never would have met and understanding a lot of kinds of lives I never would have seen, and that was fabulous. And I now don't regret it, although at the time I was gritting my teeth and saying, when do I get to stop doing this? So yes, life is worth living while you're working, while you're writing.
But you also knew you didn't want to do the corporate 9 to 5. You wanted to be a writer at your desk facing the blank page, however difficult that was.
Yes, and what I had to figure out was how to do that while I was temping. So I would think, okay, my blank page is here. I mean, at the time, I would have like a little spiral notebook, but that would be the blank page. Or I would just take some of their office stationery and put it in the typewriter and write a little bit of whatever I was working on. And so that was actually really good for me, because what I learned was the blank page, whenever you open it, for however long you open it, that's the game. That's the best thing you can do. And so therefore, even if I only had 15 minutes between Xeroxing and filing, throw that stolen stationery in there and write even just some notes to myself. This is the story I want to write, and this is what I'm thinking about it. Or some thoughts about a character, half a page. Somebody would come over and tell me to Xerox something. I would take the page, throw it in my little briefcase, and then after a while I'd have a big stack of those and I could start to really work from it. So, yeah.
Well, you've said that you have few regrets, but one regret you do have is the amount of time you put in trying to figure out the rules of the game and how to, quote, win the game.
Yeah. I would say among the biggest regrets I have was the amount of time I spent trying to figure out what they wanted. And at the time, there was a relatively clear they. There's a relatively small industry and a relatively few companies, and it took them a couple years to make a movie, so you knew what they were working on. Now, literally it's changing every 6 months what they want, because they'll say, oh, this is trending, let's veer over to that. But at the time, I could really say, like, what do they want? And I spent a lot of time doing what I thought they wanted instead of what I thought was my best. And now I wish I hadn't. I'm not saying you should only do whatever you feel like and not think at all about how to get it out to the public. But I do wish someone had told me, at the end of the day, you're going to look back at things that you did just to please someone else, and you're going to wish that instead you had done that thing that was burning in your heart. That even if it was a disastrous failure, you will look back and say, that was worth it, that was fun, it was me, I did my best. And it feels, to me at least, it feels better. I know that there are many people who don't feel like something counts unless it's accepted by the industry and put through the business and released in a formal way. I believe that's one good thing, but it's not the only thing. And that something you do for yourself, something you do by yourself and release on your own, which now, thank goodness, we actually can do. And even if only a handful of people see it, that's the whole point of what you're doing, is to do something authentically yours and show it to someone. And if even a tiny percentage of them authentically get it, that's literally the end. That's the only end I know of art. The rest of art is endless. You're just like, well, let me see what I can do next. But individually, you do a piece, and if somebody gets it, that's the satisfaction. And if somebody were to pay a lot for it and nobody got it, it's nice to pay your bills, but it feels crappy. And I have had that happen. I have had my name on television episodes where literally there isn't a single line I wrote. And I loved working on that, and I loved paying the bills, but I was constantly thinking, well, when am I going to get to do my thing? Which is exactly like what it was like at the temp office. So day jobs are day jobs, whether or not they're fancy industry day jobs or you're working at a pharmaceutical advertising company, which morally I kind of wish I hadn't done, but I had to pay the rent.
You said trying to figure out the rules and win the game. When you say rules, are you also talking about writing rules, or this was just industry rules?
I'm not sure that there's that much of a difference between writing rules and industry rules, because the writing rules, unless there's somebody who has some deep aesthetic belief that they're going to make rules about, most of the rules come from somebody saying, this is what we want to buy, or this is what they're trying to sell. Honestly, most of the rules that are currently taught, promulgated, are just industry rules. They're not art rules. Like that, even the 3-act structure, that's not actually an art rule. I mean, there are periods of time in theater back in the late 1900s and mid 20th century where plays had 3 acts, but movies never had acts. They just borrowed that from theater because they needed something to hang on to because they were making it up as they went along. So I don't know, there are many art theories. You can call them rules if you want, but they're just theories. They're just somebody's best guess at what should be done or what they think is good. The rest of the rules, so-called, are just somebody, it's cool that Sid Field wrote that, which is an amazing book. Sid Field's book, Screenplay, amazing. However, he sort of said, there's 3 acts and they work like this, and this is the turning point. And that was a really good way to do it. It's not an actual universal thing of art. And if you look at Shakespeare's plays, he doesn't really do that. So for me, learning the industry rules, what the business was looking for at the moment. And when you're young, you think whatever's happening at the moment is universal. And now that I'm old, I look back and I see that I've gone through many universals and that they have then been forgotten. And so therefore, whatever universals we think we've got, they're temporary. They're artistically, things are constantly changing. And I do regret that I spent a lot of time trying to please the industry at the expense of something I truly loved and believed in.
And this is slightly off topic, and it's hard to define what is old. If you're talking about, 20 under...
Social Security.
Okay, well, I think that just went up.
Actually, I haven't done Social Security yet, but no, I'm 67.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm old.
You're young.
I'm literally old.
Well, it's relative, though.
Yes.
And what I was going to say is that, did you have an old soul? I know you talked about in college. I couldn't picture you being an old soul in college.
I think partly the definition of old soul for me was having a lot of anxiety as a child. So I was very fearful and therefore very alert, trying to make sure I wasn't done in by any number of horrible imaginary things. And I guess that made me aware before my time, perhaps, of the sweep of human life, which is what you get as you go older.
Sure.
It is funny because I've heard recently, like you'll hear somebody, well, we're all gonna die.
Right.
Most of us really, really try not to think about that.
Sure.
One of the values of art actually is to remind us in a palatable way, so that because the value of it is to make you spend more time on the things that are truly valuable and truly what you won't regret when you are at the end. And those things are not necessarily aligned with what makes you most popular or most wealthy. And that's a balance you have to work on when you're an artist, because you want popularity because you want people to see your stuff, or you may just want popularity because you like attention.
Sure.
And that's cool. But for me, the awareness of the fragility of the things around us was ever present. And I believe that is what attracts us to art, because art holds on to those things. The only way to hold on to something is either in your mind, or if it's going to be an object, it's going to be a picture of it or a story about it. And somehow or other, those things hold the sweep of time. Boy, I am getting grand here.
I love it. This is great.
It's yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. No. That's it. We are very fragile, and we are in time, and therefore, art is one of the few things, and I would include history and philosophy and all those things as essentially art forms. They are ways to capture or understand this thing we're in, this life. And so, yeah, I was attracted to that very early on. It was one of the few things that comforted me as a child. And so I just clung to it. I sort of got addicted to it in a very real sense. In other words, I don't feel good if I am on withdrawal from art. If I can't consume some art and make some art of any kind, I feel bad. So yeah, sorry, I forgot the question.
No, I love it. And lastly, and I love this topic here. You say if you felt a withdrawal from art at some, or if you feel that you're having a withdrawal from art, that you don't feel good. If you're ever in one of those settings, if you remember back, let's say the pharmaceutical company or whatever, and you weren't being artistic, but is there an art to being this observer of these busy bees and how,
Absolutely.
We'll get them on the phone now,
And that's actually the only part of it that really stays with me. I have to say I don't often think back of it and think about how miserable I often was. And I was just resentful of having to make a living. I was resentful of all that. And I was like, why won't they just let me have all my time to do whatever I want? But the truth is, first of all, I would take notes on people and things and stuff that was going on. And that's what tends to cling to my memory now. And that is food for the rest of the work, for the rest of your life. I had the good luck to meet Robert Benton, who directed Kramer versus Kramer, wrote Bonnie and Clyde, Places in the Heart. He was a brilliant, brilliant filmmaker. And I got to meet him a few times, and when I was temping. And he would say, like, how's it going? And I would say, I hate this temping thing. And he'd say, you are going to look back on that, and that is going to be the fuel for everything you're going to do once you are not temping anymore. And I was like, thank you very much, sir. You can say that. You've got an Academy Award. I'm sitting in the temporary. But he was right. He was absolutely right. It makes you who you are. All of those things, whatever those are. Mine was that. Other people's will be very, very different, but it doesn't matter. whatever you are is the fuel that you will feed into the locomotive furnace of your work and use it to move ahead. Yeah, it's if all you do is study what is successful popular art or what sells, then all you'll be feeding into that engine is other people's stuff. And there's a hollowness to that, I believe. Sometimes it can be great. I mean, a lot of hollow art is a lot of fun, but there's something about that feeling that you're connecting to real people's lives, that you're connecting to some real experience that will animate, and it'll animate literally in the sense of bring life to, give life to whatever art you're doing. Whether it's a caper movie or a study of a family in crisis, that feeling that you're somehow connecting to human truth is really, really important. And it's not, that's the rules that it's not in the rules. The rules will say, be sure to put in some truth. Spend some time thinking about truth. Spend some time thinking about what is true and why, and what does it mean to you, and what does it mean to this made-up story that's patently untrue. But where is the truth in that? Where is the thing that you feel or that you know, that you say, oh, I recognize that emotion or that experience of loss or gain or whatever it is that is happening in the story.
How do you define story?
I would say that story is what happens. Because to me that comes to the question of story and plot. And I think of it as story is what is happening in the lives of the people in the story, in the characters. In other words, whatever's actually happening to them, which happens in the order that it happens chronologically in their lives. It's what happens. Whereas plot is how we tell that story. That to me, they're very different because you can tell things in many, many different ways. You can tell the same story in many, many different ways. So the story, though, remains like whatever happened. Like Hamlet's father died. Whether or not Hamlet's father was or was not poisoned, different versions, different plots of the same story. Whether or not the ghost is going to talk to Hamlet, or Hamlet's just going to be personally pissed off and angry, after those things. But the death and the eventual catastrophic climax of his anger about that's what happened. Whether you decide to, it's possible to tell that story of Hamlet from the parents' point of view, and like, this kid is out of control. What are we going to do with him? He's going crazy, and well, let's let him put on his play or whatever. Like, there's a whole version of that, which is, and actually, this is so dumb because Tom Stoppard wrote that. Tom Stoppard wrote Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which is a brilliant play about two very minor characters in Hamlet and about their experience of the story of Hamlet when they're just dragged into it for a couple of scenes and then, spoiler alert, they're killed. So they're headed towards their death for reasons they don't understand, and that's their story through the events. And Tom Stoppard decided, hey, what if I look at that and tell Hamlet that way? And what was revealed in that was how we are all dragged into things and heading towards our death without any knowledge of why. And that's why it's such a fabulous, profound play. I urge everyone to read it. But anyway, the point is, for me, story is the events. It's the things that happen to the people. Then plot is how we tell that story, which events of their lives. Lots of things are, they stopped and had lunch. During Hamlet, they stopped and had lunch and they took a shower. And we cut that out of our plot, of our version of the story. So to me, it's important to remember that the story is there. People talk about story in the industry as essentially the plot. It's my definition of the plot. Story is the way you are telling this movie's story. But what I think is that there's a story, there's things that happened, and then there's how you tell it. And to me, it's good to remember that both of those things exist. The story may only exist as you make it up, but once you've got it, it's there, and then you can decide, oh, I'm going to skip this part, or I'm going to do this part as a flashback, or whatever it is. That's not actually changing the story. It's not actually changing the character's experience. And I think it's very valuable to respect the character's experience and then think of yourself as the storyteller, the person who's putting that set of events and characters into a work of art, which is by necessity, because all art is limited, going to leave out a lot and interpret a lot.
How much of your view of story has changed over the years?
I think I simply didn't define it for myself. I just operated on it without thinking until I started teaching. Having finished my career and decided to do some teaching, and I had to put this into words, I had to figure out these things I'm saying now. Often I was not aware of them while I was doing them. I just looked at it that way. So I don't think my sense, there was probably a while there where I was just parroting whatever I had read or heard about how to tell a story. But I think there's a natural vibe, there's a natural way that we work, and it's different for everybody. And my natural way to work was to sort of feel like the things that were happening in a story were real. that when I watched a movie, it was kind of real, and then the movie was just like this overlay over it. And honestly, my memory of this is, and it may not be correct, but in the romanticized version, my initial instinct was simply to want to be in the art, want to be in the story. I wanted, I started reading with the Hardy Boys, and I just wanted to be in the Hardy Boys. I wanted to be a Hardy Boy, or I wanted to, it didn't occur to me that there was this extra layer of art over that. It was just this thing that you could open a book and go into, and it was alive to me. At a certain point, I recognized that I was never going to be a Hardy Boy. It actually was, I may have mentioned this before.
I think you did, but I love
this. Yeah. I was a big James Bond fan from the movies initially, and then I tried reading the books. But James Bond was just really a big deal to me in the 1960s when I was 10 years old. And I stumbled across an article by Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond, and he wrote an article about how he wrote James Bond. And it was very debonair and funny. It was a great article, and I read that, it blew my mind. I was like, okay, I can't be James Bond, but I could be Ian Fleming. I could be the guy who makes up James Bond and works out how you tell that story. And that was the switch for me. And from then on, that's all I wanted to do.
I love that. I love that you said you wanted to be in the art, because that crystallizes things for me as well. Because I think of all the movies that I love, and I want to be in them. I want to be one of the characters too. I want to live in that world.
I kind of feel like I was. I have to tell you, I often will, I have a lot of books, and I will never get to reread them. And a lot of them, I look at them and I say, I don't remember what happened in that book, but I keep it on my shelf, partly because it reminds me of when I read it, but also when I look at them, the ones that I do remember, even if it's just a scene or something, it's almost like a thing that happened to me. It's almost like my memories are all these travels, are all these adventures, are all these experiences. I had a much better life in books and movies and music than I could ever have in my real life. I love that I've devoted so much of my real life to that fantasy life, because to me, that's, as I look back on it, I'm like, that was so great when I was in 19th century Russia with the Golovlyev family. and that's good enough. memories are memories. Whether or not they're yours or borrowed, they're still your memories and they still evoke those feelings. So yeah, I kind of think you do live in art when it's working for you. And that's legit. I don't think that that's fake.
And do you think that's what separates people who talk about wanting to do it from those who actually go and do it, whether it's writing, filmmaking, whatever art they're pursuing? Because it's so difficult, it's because you're obsessed with wanting to live in that world?
No, actually, I think that the dividing line is between the people who just don't feel that at all. And I know that there are plenty of people, they probably won't be watching this, but there's plenty of people out there who could take it or leave it as far as art goes. As far as books and movies and stories and paintings and music, everything. It's like, yeah, that's fine. It decorates my life. But they are not in there. And that, I think those people will never, and cool. I mean, I don't think they should. It's just how you're built. But anyone who has that connection, it's perfectly fine to have that connection simply as a fan, as a consumer, as a lover of the art, and never want to write it at all. What's more, not everyone has the gifts or the particular twisted brain operations that make you able to make that stuff work, even though you love it. And it's okay. You do not have to be an artist, and you do not have to be a professional artist if you are an artist. There is absolutely no requirement, and honestly, it's not that much better, except for the pay, and that's frankly changing now and getting harder to make. So therefore, the idea that somehow professional art gives you something extra, it's nice, but you can do just as well doing fan fiction or whatever it is that you're gonna gonna do and never show anybody. That's all the same good thing. And the thing that makes you an artist is an extra layer of bizarre, twisted self in which you feel it, you feel you want to do it, and when you do it, it kind of works. Even though it will never work as well as you think. And so many people get prevented from doing it because it takes a long time and a lot of practice to where it comes out the way you want. And a lot of people give up there. And I would say, don't give up. Keep doing it. The more you do it, the more you're likely to have that magical ability. But you should look inside. If you feel like you want to just live in the art world, live in the art world. Just read it a lot, talk to other fans, have fun, whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to make it, that's a separate layer. And that requires a whole lot of experience and practice and experimenting and failing and discovering. And so I guess I've sort of created now a three worlds. The world of people who don't care about art, or it's just whatever. The people who love art but don't really want to do it or can't do it. And the people who love art and want to do it. And I have to say, we were talking before about regrets. One of the things I deeply regret is because I was in that want to do it phase, much of my life, until I was in, I guess, my 40s or 50s, I had a certain contempt for the people who didn't care about art. I thought they were essentially not real people. You weren't a real person if you didn't love art. And it took me a while to recognize that there's a perfectly good life with no art in it, or just art as decoration. And that's cool. And frankly, a lot of people who, if you're a doctor, it is very likely that you don't have a lot of time to spend on art. You may have a little downtime and watch something or read something, but you got other stuff to do. And that's good. Thank God the world has that. If the world was only populated by artists, we would be in big trouble. So that's sort of how I see it, is that there's sort of a spectrum of experience with art, which can go from very, very minimal to way too much. And it's not like one is better than the other. It's just figuring out what your natural abilities or connection is, and loving it.
As a writer, how do you know you have a story?
Well, we can look at the video I made, which you guys titled that, and it was really funny because I hadn't thought of it that way. Anyway, how do you know you have a story? All right. I am going to be, I don't know, countercultural. You know you have a story when you decide you have a story. There's no, like, you know, I believe that Terrence Malick, who makes movies that for most people are just completely incomprehensible, he feels there's a story, and the people who like his work feel there's a story, so there's a story. There's an industry definition of a story, which honestly is tied to various theoreticians who come along. Like I said, Sid Field for a while, Robert McKee for a while, the Save the Cat guy, whose name I keep forgetting.
Blake Snyder. Yeah.
Right, Blake Snyder. The point is that they're different, Vogel, they're different philosophers of screenwriting who have come into fashion, and people cling to that when they're in the business of making art, or when you're looking for something to hang on to in art to get past the actual truth, which is art is what you decide it is. Popular art may not be, well-paid art may not be, but the fact is you can do something that is obscure to others and it is still legitimate art. So to me, the way that you tell a story is going to be the way that you, in your experience of the world and in your experience of having glommed up other art, and you'll have said, I watched this movie and it spoke to me, and I watched this movie and it didn't speak to me. So the one that didn't speak to you tends to fall out, and the one that speaks to you stays in there and begins to shape your sense of story. And then you pile in others, and no two people will have the same pile. We all have different lives, and we all have different libraries of experience of art we've experienced. And what happens is all that stuff jumbles together and tells you, this is a good story, this isn't a story that works. And essentially, artistically, that's how you know you have a story, is that you say, this feels right to me. The caveat to that, the tricky part is, for a long time when you are working, you are going to be afraid you're doing it wrong. And so therefore you're going to not trust your own instincts and not say, that is a good story. And the other thing is, for a long time when you are trying to learn to be an artist, you're not going to do as well as you can imagine. And honestly, even now, and I have been doing this for 50 years, and yet I will still imagine a piece of work, and it takes me a long time to let go of the imagined version to accept the actual version. And that's when I can start to do good work. But for a while, I'm just like, it's not good, it's not good. It's not what I thought it would be. And at a certain point, you learn it doesn't matter what you thought it would be. You managed to make this half-created thing, and it's got something going on, because it always does. That's the story. That's the answer. Work and make that work. Make it better. Make it do whatever it should do, not what you thought it was going to do. So my answer would be, you know you have a story when, A, if you do this a lot, you'll get a confidence about that process, because it's really about the process. Every work is different, but your process tends to come from you and be sort of the same. And the process has to include uncertainty. It has to include not knowing that you have a story and being able to live with that until it clicks together and is. So you know that you have you'll know when you have it if you listen to yourself and to the judgment of the things that you are working from. If you are trying to succeed in the business, definitely study all those books and learn their rules and check against their rules. Absolutely. If you want to do that, and if you like a certain type of movie and that followed that rules, learn those rules. Absolutely. But they are not universal. All stories do not need to be that. And if your needs and instincts are different, just accept that it's unlikely to sell. Selling isn't everything. You know you have a story when it makes sense to you. And if nothing ever makes sense to you, if you always feel your stuff is bad, that's not actually a problem with your work. That's an emotional problem that you have to deal with separately. If every time you write, you feel my work is bad, how could all of your work be bad? It's not bad. You're just hearing it's not good enough, you'll fail, whatever voices you've got in your head that you've, out of anxiety, out of fear, you are saying, is it good enough? Is it good enough? If you learn to identify that and say, shut up for now, and you just look at, do I like this? Am I having fun? Does it move me? Does it entertain or interest me? That's how you know.
One thing that we hear a lot about is that character is action. What does this mean to you?
I like that. I just don't think it goes far enough. Character is action in the sense that if someone does something, we know something about them. But the same action can have very different meanings. In the book, I wrote a book.
Oh, right. It came out in October?
Yes.
Can I see it?
Yeah,
Can I see
it's called Writing
the beautiful
for Screens.
cover. Oh,
Yes,
wow.
thank
Okay.
you. Anyway,
it.
in the book, I say, I use an example which is very violent, so I'm a little afraid to say it here. But the idea is if someone takes an action, I think that's a good start. Character is action in the sense that in life, we understand other people by what they are doing. And that's actually tricky because sometimes what they are doing can be interpreted different ways. But our understanding of human beings is based on our experience dealing with them and trying to understand what the hell they're doing. So that's the first thing is, yes, character is action. If they do a thing, if a person steals, they are a thief, and the character is their action. However, what if they stole to give their family medicine that they desperately need or they're going to die? Then they're not a thief, they're a parent who's trying to save their children, and the thieving is incidental to the real action. So when you say character is action, you have to think, what is the real action? The action is parenting. The action is caring for your family, so you steal. So what I like to say is that character is a series of actions, because if before we see the stealing, we see them at home, that we see them with their sick child, and they take their sick child to the hospital, and the hospital says, oh, we can absolutely help them, but it'll cost you $5,000, and you don't have insurance, so see you when you do. Then the person goes home and they say, I know where I can get $5,000 by ripping off this illegal gambling den. Now we have somebody who steals from the mob.
Right.
Okay, are they a low-down criminal stealing? No, they're a person trying to save their kid. So the actions in sequence is what defines a character, because none of us are just one thing, and many actions can have different reasons. And so therefore you need to know the action, but you need to know the reason for the action. In screenplay terms, that means you need to show the reason for the action. So you're going to have a series of actions, a series of events, and that is going to define a character. If all you say is the character is action, and therefore they are a thief or a detective or a hero or whatever, it's going to be a little thin. But if you think, oh, this person is both a thief and a parent, then there's this weird richness that comes to it, and that's what is real character.
And so for your love of James Bond, how did his character define, how did all these actions define his character?
Okay, this is a tricky one because there's the James Bond of the books and there's the James Bond of the different series of movies. But let's just talk about Ian Fleming's James Bond and Daniel Craig's James Bond. And I will not get too nerdy about this, but what I will say is Ian Fleming's James Bond was a little thin as a character. He was a lot of fun, and there was a couple of incidents where he had emotional depth, but most of the time he was just fun. The Daniel Craig series, actually, they really get into his character, and I quite like those. And the point of that would be, he is a spy, he is licensed, meaning he's often assigned to kill someone, and therefore is he a murderer? Is he a soldier? He's a person who is, in theory, trying to do the right thing, ideally for the world, but certainly for his country. And in in trying to do the right thing, he may have to be violent because the people he is up against are violent. And there is a good argument that perhaps a well-supplied police force could have arrested those people and put them in jail and not shot them. But for the purposes of entertainment, we just want one guy out there shooting them. So the answer is, any character is always going to be defined by the number of things you get in there. If you just get one, if they're just slick and cool and make funny comments when they kill people, that's a layer. But if you put under that what got them into that business, or what they're afraid of, or what they're troubled by, and the good versions of spy stories do that, that's character. And there's, by the way, nothing wrong with some slick entertainment which just says, you know what, for just a minute, we're going to pretend that a hero has nothing to worry about and that they're going to save the day, and it's all about how entertainingly can they save the day, which is great. We need that sometimes.
Do you believe that every main character has to change?
No. I do think that something has to change. In other words, if you have an unchanging main character, then either that unchanging main character is going to have to deal with a world which the world needs to change, and so they are unchangingly trying to change others, or you're going to have a situation where you may fear that they're going to change, and then in fact they don't. That's a good story. A cool story could be somebody who you like, and then things happen to them and you think, oh man, they're going to lose their idealism, or they're going to, whatever it is. And the story is actually about how they manage not to change. So it is possible to not have the character change, but the world around that idealistic character changed and threatened their ability to remain idealistic. Or they are faced with this, like you get some person who's good and you don't want them to change, but then they move to a new place. Or the place that they are in changes and they have to deal with things that it worked while they were one way, but now can they still be that way? There's a lot of good stories in which a person doesn't change, but they change others, or and very often it's just one. Like it'll be a story about how someone learns from someone else. Actually, The Shawshank Redemption is kind of a good version of that, because Andy doesn't change. He stays the course, and it's the people around him who learn from him. You can always theorize or formulate a way to say, oh, he changed, but I don't know. I always worry about any theory that says everything must be the same. All characters must change. That troubles me. I don't know that there is any rule absolute to all stories. I believe that there's different possibilities, and the only thing I think, and this one could be, there's probably a good argument against it. The only thing that I can think of that's absolutely universal to all stories is they have to begin and end somewhere. At some point you have to start, and at some point you have to end. What goes on in between? There's many possibilities. And some are more familiar or popular than others. But to say there's an absolute rule that all stories work this way, I just guarantee I'll find a great story that doesn't work that way.
Now, with action, would you say that there's a lot of change? I mean, I get there's change in the story in that usually the bad guys are taken down in some sense. But let's say if we take Die Hard, since it's around Christmas and that usually plays around this time, does Bruce Willis's character really change in that film?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that he doesn't change. He's facing an increasing series of challenges. And honestly, I think the question of Die Hard is simply, can he do it? Just that simple. And I think that the thing that people don't admit is when we're watching a movie like Die Hard, we know he's going to do it. Right. So the pleasure of Die Hard is not whether or not he's going to do it, it's how. And that's really great. But that's why Die Hard is so great, because the how is so much fun. It's unexpected. It's the levels increase. There's twists and turns to how. But the idea that he is going to fail, honestly, I don't think anybody believes that.
Right. Okay.
So that's one of the things that when we say, like, you have to fear that Bruce Willis is going to die, I don't think anybody watching Die Hard really thought that that was going to end with him dead on the ground and everyone else blown up. No, we knew that. So our pleasure in a story like that is how, and that's where the invention and the revelation comes in. Like if he does it, by being unexpectedly nice to someone, which admittedly is not Die Hard, but there are stories like that where somehow or other, or there's many stories of like the apparently weak, ineffectual person finds in themselves the strength to do the strong thing. Honestly, I don't think any of us watching that mild, ineffectual person at the beginning ever thought, well, that's just going to stay the same for the whole movie. We know they're going to come and be the hero, if nothing else from the trailer.
Sure, right. If a character doesn't have to change, what is the purpose of character arcs?
Well, in the story of a person who doesn't change, the arc is going to be, how do they find a way to stay themselves in the face of unexpected, arcing, increasing threats to their ability to stay themselves. So the arc is, what do they discover in themselves that says, you know what, I'm going to stay myself. There's going to be a point at which they're going to say, I could walk away, I could quit, I may fail. Whatever the things are that is a threat to that self, that is going to be the arc, is how they deal with that, how they stay true. So the arc doesn't have to be how they change, it can be how they learn that they have more in them than they thought. I would say, if we were talking about Die Hard before, in Die Hard, I don't think that McClane had previously had to swing around the outside of a building and run on broken glass. Those were things he was doing for the first time. And so therefore the arc is, can he do it? Is he going to make it across that glass? Spoiler, a mild spoiler.
So what, over 30 years?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Anyway, so I believe the answer is, there's always an arc, in the sense that to me, the arc is, how will the character get what they want or what they are trying to do in the face of difficult obstacles. Now, that does not usually that is, oh, I thought I was going to have to just be real friendly to everyone and then I would get what I wanted. Okay, no, I'm going to have to go around the outside and cheat somebody in order to get what I want. That's their arc. They had to change. They had to learn a new skill or option. But often it's, I'm an old-fashioned person and the world has become modern. And then the challenge is, during the story, is like, there's a point at which they say, maybe I should just maybe this old-fashioned thing isn't right. But then they're like, you know what? It is. And all the people in the story who are saying you can't stay old-fashioned, it will be about, how do you either persevere through that, or how do you convince them to support it? Whatever it is, you have to define, what is it that they are trying to do, and what are the obstacles, and what steps get to the thing that resolves that question. Because the question is always going to be, how do they do what they're trying to do when it's hard, when something is in the way, when something is making it difficult for them? And that's the sort of basic mechanics of most stories. Is not all, because I don't believe all stories have anything, but most familiar Western stories will be somebody trying to do something, and there's something that's making it difficult. And so they'll try something to solve that, and it'll not work, or it'll make things worse, or it'll only work partially. And so they have to think, okay, what new thing will fix this not working? And then they try that new thing. And then sometimes there's complications that arise from the thing they're trying. Sometimes, often, things get worse. That's what an arc is. But that arc could be, how do I stay the same when everything is begging me to change?
You had me thinking of the Truman Show, because, you're talking about, nice and polite and everything. And Truman's arc I don't know if we saw it coming, when we first watched
Yeah.
a good portion of the movie, and it kind of reveals itself. We don't realize what journey he's on.
Yes. Actually, that's another good example of a character who he doesn't change in the sense that the essential Trumanness of him, the nice, friendly, kind of overly optimistic guy,
Right.
that's his last line. No, not going to give it away, but we know that he's still that guy. The question of the Truman Show is, and I think that this is safe. It's not a spoiler. The question is, can he get out of the restrained situation he's in? And if he does, will he be okay? And I believe that by the end of the story, we know he will be okay. But the question all the way through is, wow, can he stay the same when he is no longer in a cocoon of a created world?
Glenn, when you say dialogue is action, what does that mean?
People don't talk to each other without some intention. In other words, if you speak, like obviously in a certain sense, like you can go to the counter at a deli and say, can you give me that thing on the shelf? You're speaking because you want something. But you could also be sitting around a living room with a bunch of other people and you say something that you hope is funny because you want to make everyone like you, or you want to impress a certain people, or you want to put somebody down. Whatever it is, those are very different intentions. And those are things you want to do. I want to impress. I want to insult. Whatever it is, you are trying to do something when you speak, always. And the range of things that you could be doing in dialogue is very large, but it's always doing something. Sometimes it's just stalling, but then stalling is an action. That's the important thing to remember. Refusing to give information is an action. So therefore, you could be evading. You could be saying, somebody says like, where's the secret formula? And you say, I remember when I was a kid, and you're just, you're stalling. You're avoiding telling. That is an action. Anytime you have people speak, they are trying to do something to the other people in that scene. That is the operating thing that makes dialogue feel alive. The problem is almost always people are, for some reason, convinced that dialogue is information. In other words, that they are telling someone because the audience needs to know, I'm going to the train station to pick up my uncle because he lost his business. Okay, unless the other person in that scene needs to know about the lost business, that line's going to be weird. Like, if there's two people who have both been living together for a year and their uncle is coming and they clearly have heard, they know about the uncle, and then somebody says, I got to go to the train station because my uncle lost his business, the other person in the room say, I know. So the point is you have to think, okay, how would it be? Like, can I find someone who doesn't know? Or can you say, the other person will say, are you sure your uncle's on the train? He may have not gotten on because of his business. And he's like, yeah, well, he lost it. He needs to come. Somehow or other, you get the information into the moment that those two people are living, because they are living that moment. They are in that room deciding to go to the train station. And if for some reason you can't get your information into that, either change the scene and have it be that they're getting into a taxi and they're saying, I got to get to the taxi. And the taxi driver says, oh, you're taking a trip? He says, no, I'm going to see my uncle. And you spill it out because you're just venting it. But the action there is you are venting anxiety to a person who will leave your life and there's no consequences. So the action is venting. But you couldn't do that to the person in your house because there's consequences to venting those feelings. So you have to think, where can this information dramatically make sense? Where does the person have a need and a reasonable expectation of that thing happening make sense to that scene? It's not about the information. You do have information you're trying to get across, but always ask, why does this person need to say that to the other person in this place at this moment? That's what dialogue is, action. And very often, a good scene can be two people talking, and there's a lot of action even though they're just sitting there talking. The most famous example of is the opening scene of The Social Network. That's 9 minutes of two people sitting at a cafe table. A lot is happening. He's trying to impress her and win her over. She is basically realizing she's going to break up with him. This is not a spoiler, it's the first scene. But the point is, it's 9 minutes of dialogue right there. And it's action. A lot happens in that scene. There's a lot of back and forth of he feels undermined. He feels like he's, and she feels like she's being ignored. And so they are saying things to essentially test, can you see me? Can you see that I have this feeling and I need you to recognize it? And they don't. And that causes the scene to go the way it goes. The point is, it's action. Something is happening between these two people. It's very important to them at that moment. It's just talk. 12 Angry Men. It's just talk for 2 hours, but it's great.
Right, Glengarry Glen Ross.
Glengarry Glen Ross, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I was looking something up about class, and I'll try to speed it up here, but just the way certain classes, maybe lower classes, which I was exposed to a lot of growing up, maybe is more direct and could be maybe at times seen as rude. And then I also was exposed to maybe more of a middle class where things are said in sort of a circuitous manner, where it's, hey, could you maybe, you don't want to offend anybody, but you don't really say what you mean. So just kind of the meshing of these two worlds and revealing someone's class by how they say something,
Well, that's actually a really important layer to this, which is while dialogue is action and that someone is trying to do something, we very rarely just say what we want. We just in life, because we are afraid we won't get it, or we feel like we have to maneuver the other person, or we feel like there's a certain set of social rules that you do not do or do not do certain things. So the thing about dialogue being action is while it is action, it may not be on the surface. It may be subtext in the sense that what the person wants, like somebody would say, oh, did you get the milk? And what they're really saying is, were you out gambling?
Right. I read that. Yeah. I totally got that. Yeah.
So and you would only know that because of other things around it, but they know it and they'll play it that way. And when you put that with the other scene where you see him gambling, and then the other scene where you see her, calling him up and saying, why isn't he at the office? And then when he comes home and she says, did you get the milk? We know that what she really means is, were you out gambling again? So the action is there, and it's very important to understand the action. Dialogue as action does not mean everything is on the nose. On the nose means you are saying exactly what you think. And the truth is we very rarely do it, which is why people say on the nose is bad, but actually on the nose is good when it comes at the right moment. Like at a certain point, you want to go on the nose. You want to say, this game playing of saying about the milk when you really mean, and at a certain point when they burst out and they say, I can't handle you gambling anymore. That's like the climax of the scene, like whatever was happening, the action was a game before then. Can I deny it? Can I avoid it? And no, how can I get him to say this without causing a fight? And then eventually it blows up into that explosion, and then the scene turns. The scene turns because someone was on the nose. On the nose is not bad. You just got to know when to use it.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Right, and that's great. And having worked in offices, they'll, how was your weekend, Glenn? Yeah.
Yes,
what does she mean by that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We are all constantly reading each other. That's the important thing, is that to recognize that, and this is a failure of much modern cinema, because it's so compressed. There's so little time in a screen story. So therefore, people tend to just jam in the important stuff right on the surface. But the truth is, we spend our whole lives trying to read everyone around us, even the people we know and love. We're constantly reading them. So a good movie or screen story is going to let us read the characters. They're not going to tell us everything. We're going to read them, and then we get involved because we say, oh, he said that, but he means that. I wonder how the other person will react. Oh, I wonder I know that this tension is boiling underneath it because they're not saying it. Well, if you simply said it out loud, if you put everything up front so that the audience knows everything, then they have nothing to do. And audiences don't actually like to sit back and be told everything. Audiences like to put it together for themselves. You give them the pieces. Your job is figuring out what pieces do they want. It's like building a puzzle. And to say, okay, if you give them this piece and they give them this piece, they're going to be wondering how they go together or what's going to break when they go together. And so what our job really is to create something that the audience can read, can interpret, can work on. If you give them everything, they get bored, and then they just want more explosions.
No, it was great. I put it in ChatGPT, and I was curious what would two women in an office, one being more middle class and one being lower, how could they maybe misread each other by what they were saying? And it wasn't either one wasn't trying to offend, but the way somebody said it, maybe they were off-putting and they didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And it was great.
And actually, the question with that, the interesting thing, if you have two characters and you're trying to create a tension with the unspoken, the most important thing is that you, as the writer, needs to know the thing they are driven by, the thing that they are hiding, and then you decide not to put it. You say, what would they say to try and get what they want without saying what they want? And so you think, and that's when you create a character, because there's a lot of different ways. Somebody could be very jokey, or somebody could be sort of telling about themselves and just talking about themselves, and it's sort of weird that they are, because their stories about themselves are actually trying to get to provoke someone. So the way you create and define a character is by knowing the thing underneath, but then adding this made up layer. And there's not a right or wrong. That's where the stuff that's yours, like, oh, I think it would be funny if they just talked about flowers all the time. And so you just say, okay, well, how would the flower thing get into a romance discussion with the other person? And so there's like this layer of writing, knowing like the core action, and then that extra layer of decoration over it, which is personal. We all just say, oh, that would be, I like this character to be this way. And there's no right or wrong about that.
Right, but I love what you said about something about on the nose is where the tension sort of happens.
Yeah.
You know, so
yeah,
sort of like...
You want on the nose, you want it to either get things going or get things to stop, that something is going to happen. On the nose is a turning point, a revelation, like you finally explain or blurt out the truth. That's something that gets built up to, or that's something that comes out and then creates ripples of consequences. So you want on the nose, but you want it at the key moments. The moment that the audience will go, whoa, what's going to happen now? Or, oh, now I understand that on the nose is a very, very valuable tool.
What's the relationship between show, don't tell, and dialogue?
A lot of people think that show, don't tell means put things into physical action. In other words, show being something you can look at without words. But that's not actually what show, don't tell means. What show, don't tell means is don't explain something. You can have people use words in order to, as I've said earlier, if someone is talking, they're trying to get something from the other person or make something happen. So there's an action there. And if that action is showing us how they feel or what they want, that's showing. Talking can be showing. The idea that talking is somehow not active is kind of a throwback. There was a period in Hollywood history, after silent films, when they first developed sound film, it was very difficult to record sound. They had to pad the whole place, and you really couldn't move that far from the microphone. Singing in the Rain explains it very well, and Babylon also explains it very well. The point is, for a long time, movies became stage-bound. they became talky because they couldn't record sound if they didn't stand still and talk. So they got a lot of people who were in bad versions explaining everything. In good versions, it's like a great play, and a great play, there's a lot of action happening in the dialogue. But what happened is, for about 30 or 40 years of Hollywood history, movies were very stuck. They were very talky. And so in the 50s and 60s, when technology allowed for sound recording to go crazy and you could shoot on site and you could do all this stuff, and films from other places outside Hollywood were showing other ways to do things, what happened was people discovered there are other ways for cinema to tell things other than basically filming a play. And in that moment, the idea that dialogue is bad was born. And that's a sad, tragic mistake. Dialogue is part of cinema. Talk is part of life. And therefore, you don't want to get rid of all the dialogue. You want to make the dialogue come alive in action, in showing. In other words, when someone talks, they are trying to do something which we are reading, we are interpreting, we are understanding what they are saying. They are not explaining to us, they are trying to act upon the other person in the room. We, the audience, don't exist. We got to figure out what they're up to. That's good dialogue, that's action, that's dialogue, and it's showing. The idea that all showing is simply visual makes for either very shallow movies or really cool movies, but often missing a certain part of our real lives. We talk a lot in real life. I'm talking a lot now, but think about your life. Think about how much of what you do in your life is talking. When you want something from someone, you tell them or you try to get them to do it. You do it with words, with dialogue. If you look at the amount of dialogue in your life, if you start to if you start to analyze the action of the dialogue in your everyday life, it's kind of mind-blowing how dramatic and how much action there is in talking. So my answer is, show, don't tell means make things happen. In other words, don't explain it, make it happen. Make someone take an action. That action can be talking or that action can be jumping off the roof. It doesn't matter. It matters that they are trying to do something in their reality, not explain to an audience, which in theory they don't even know exists. Show, don't tell should mean someone is trying to do something in the story, but we do a lot through talking.
So when you said in the last clip, the line of, I'm going to pick up my uncle, he just lost his business. Mm-hmm. Instead, it would be something like, I'm going to pick up Uncle Joe, whatever, and yeah, we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, that you would talk to the person in the room about Uncle Joe, and you would say, like, the question would be, okay, he's coming in from the train station, but he's only staying a week, right? I don't know. He's got no business left. He has nowhere to live. He could be here for 3 months. The action is these two people negotiating how long they can put up with Uncle Joe, and one feels more obligated than the other. We got the information about the business in the midst of that moment between them.
The news today is that Netflix is buying Warner Brothers, which includes HBO Max, I believe. Mm-hmm. What's your view of this techno-corporate world, mergers?
I personally believe that the direction that we are going, in which there is increasing consolidation of power in very small number of companies, and a greater and greater inequality, both in the business and in society, it's all bad. It's all really, really, really bad. And it, in fact, I hope it will not come to a violent revolution, but something's going to have to give. We cannot keep going this way. So ideally, like when, and I don't know if I'm allowed to name drop, but since you did, Netflix is saying, hey, this is going to make Netflix better, which is true. If you are watching Netflix, you will now have access to all those shows and movies. That's cool. However, what if Netflix at a certain point decides for its business model, it's better to put The Sopranos on ice for 20 years? They will have that power. And that's bad. So in our present capitalist system, the theory would be if there was multiple places that have multiple resources, they would balance each other out. They would offer things that the other doesn't have. If we consolidate to the point that there's only 2 or 3 companies, they can do what they want. And while they promise that they will do what is good for the public, they are currently not. They are doing what's good for them. They are certainly not doing what's good for the artists, and they are honestly not doing what's good for the public. They are selfish. And I think it's bad. I think that the only thing that we can do, though, is certainly on a societal level, we should vote for people who are going to try to regulate that. But in a personal artistic version, there's not a damn thing I can do about it. I am not going to be able to stop mergers. I am not going to be able to influence corporate culture to say, let's, put more stuff out there for cheaper. So what I have to do is say, what can I do in my work to create and present to whoever will look at it as much as I can? And that's actually the weird thing. The technology that is allowing Netflix to get so much money that they can buy a studio is the same technology that's letting me make a movie on my phone or write a novel and put it on the Substack. All of these things are possible for us right now. And so my personal feeling is, on a social level, we should certainly engage with that. On a creative level, it's probably best to just do the best we can with the amazing tools that this technological revolution is allowing us, and use them the best we can without trying to compete. Nothing we can do will ever give us power over the companies that currently control our technology. But within that, we can do the equivalent of having a street fair, opening a little storefront theater. We can do all that better than we ever could. So my answer is, I'm not a big fan of corporate consolidation in the arts, but I am a big fan of the technology that is allowing artists to create and distribute their work better than ever before. And I'm focusing on that. I am keeping an eye on the big picture, and I will certainly get involved to the extent I can. But we are not personally responsible to save the world. We can't. It's a beautiful thought that each one of us is important, and we are in a certain sense, but frankly only collectively. And I think that a lot has been made in the past few generations. I grew up when this was sort of happening. I grew up in the 1960s. Social change and was powered by groups of people coming together and marching in the streets. That led to a certain belief of, hey, every one of us is supposed to go and fix the world. And then a couple generations on, that came to, when you go to high school, they're like, okay, what career are you going to have, and how is that going to save the world? And that's too much pressure. It's an unfair expectation. So I personally believe that the job is, you save your world, you put on your oxygen mask before you worry about the person next to you, because you need to survive. And then you need to do your work as best you can and do the things that you believe in as truthfully as you can. And the beauty of the time we are in is that those tools are available unlike ever before in history. You can make and show art. Never before has this been possible for you to make movies by yourself and put them out without anybody having to give you the permission. Let's take advantage of that. Let's do good in that sense. But if your movie happens to not save the world, that's okay.
Right, what is it? Think globally, act locally?
Yes.
I remember growing up in San Francisco, there was a bumper sticker like that.
Yeah, although to me, I think it's more of just hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Sure. I think that's the improved version.
Yeah. Yes, but that's my feeling is basically, I think that we have an opportunity to really be better. I think that currently everyone is thinking, I can get a piece of the action, and so I want the game to continue. I want the lottery of success to remain open. But the truth is, I think the lottery is, most of us are not going to win the lottery. And the more that we recognize that there might be better systems than lotteries, that would be good. And so that's sort of like what I was saying before about regretting the amount of time I tried to figure out what would succeed. It was because I was thinking, how can I win the lottery? How can I get that chance to get the big bucks and be with the big stars? And to a certain extent, I managed it, more than most, and it's pretty cool that I did. But the cost was a fair amount of things I didn't do because I was too busy trying to win the lottery. And the truth is, sometimes you just want to take yourself out of that game and do your thing, which right now we can do. You can do it. There's no one around here who can't get something creative done and out there.
Does new technology equal new writing rules?
Yes. The rules of art, so to speak. I mean, the rules of art are constantly changing. If you read, people say read Aristotle's Poetics. And Aristotle's Poetics has a lot of good insights about basic drama. It also has a lot of things that had to do with Greek culture 2,000 years ago, and whether or not slaves were people. We've settled that. People are people. There should be no slaves. Aristotle was confused on that point. So therefore, the rules changed. Aristotle has some valuable things and some things that you can really just pass up on. So the thing is, the rules are constantly changing depending on the art form. For instance, the famous 3-act structure was partly had to do with the shape and business of theater in the time that happened. That was the creation of a particular technology of entertainment in which people went to a theater and they had a curtain and it opened up and then the curtain closed and that's an act. For 1,000 years before that, the theater was an empty space on the ground and a bunch of people sat on a hillside and they watched it, and there were no curtains, and the acts were simply somebody walked off or walked on. So technology changes the form of art. We are currently in a massive technological change, and the only problem is that at any given time, everyone thinks the art form, the art rules that they grew up with are somehow right. They're universal. And so if you transported a person from ancient Greece here, they would be like, what do you mean? Why aren't we sitting on the side of the hill watching this thing at an all-day festival once a year? That's what theater is, as opposed to a daily entertainment. The rules are constantly changing. There are no actual rules. The rules are created by a mixture of the society that it's in and the business, almost always. Now, sometimes the business is run by the state or by the religion or whatever it is, but there's some authority which is steering the rules towards certain values. So there's technology and there's business or power, and then there's the mushy stuff of art and artists and life, and they're just trying to fit into their world's rules. So currently, the rules have changed. It's not even they are changing, they have changed. The presentation of art is different than it was 20 years ago. We are looking at it on screens in our pockets. We are looking at it at home over a course of hours. We can choose which ones we see. For a long time, that wasn't true. You didn't choose what you were going to watch tonight. You went to whatever they were showing that night. So the answer is yes, the rules have changed. We've got to figure out how to work with the new ones. We may import some things from the old ones that we like. We may kind of transform them. But it is crazy to think that the rules of the last 40, 50 years are somehow right. They're not. They were good for the moment, and now it's time to work out the new ones based on what we're really working with. What kind of art is going to come from social media? Social media should be art. It should, like, there will be people who will figure out how to make art in the social media. There already are. Some people will use it as an art gallery. Some people will use it to make little 2-minute films, and some people will make 50-hour films that are in 2-minute chapters. Whatever it is, that's a legitimate form. We just have to figure out how to make it good for what we're trying to do creatively and personally. But the main thing is to recognize it's just an art form. Social media is just an art form. Streaming is just an art form. Whatever, VR is just an art. It's a technology that allows you to be creative within it. And if all you do is take the old art form and try and cram it in there, that would be very much like I was saying before, when movies got sound, they just grabbed theater and put it in there. And about 30, 40 years, most people were just making filmed plays. And then slowly people said, this film thing has some artistic, technological qualities. Like, we can cut, and we can do voiceover, and we can do all this stuff. And they began to work out ways to create cinematic language. And now that's a fully formed language, but you had to recognize that the technology was allowing new forms of expression. Video games, VR, social media, all of those things are allowing for new ways to be creative. And we should take them absolutely as seriously as theater and movies and opera before it.
Right, and now social media is becoming part of the story. Like if you look at The Social Network or Ingrid Goes West, which is such a wonderful film. I love that movie so much.
Yeah.
And then there's another one that's coming out. I'm not sure if it's on Shudder. That's like a horror film about an influencer. But so that the influencer and social media is now informing stories. They're working stories around it.
Well, it's the texture of our lives, and it's how we operate. And once again, like I said, like, just if you were spend some time thinking about how much your talk is dialogue, if you start to become aware of that, then think about how you operate in the world of social media. People are using that, and that's great. More and more profound thought will go into that, I hope. I'm begging people to start to think profoundly about what that is and to make stories. You know, the novels. Novels began as collections of letters or diaries. The first novels were called epistolary novels. In other words, you would have like a whole bunch of letters back and forth between someone, and you would track the story through their letters. And then eventually somebody said, oh, wait, let's drop this letter thing and just tell the story. But that form was somebody. Now, there are novels to be told in social media. There are, you know, just like there was, when they first started to do miniseries, they called them novels for television. Back with like Roots and things. And so I think we have to look at like, what would that technology allow us to, how to tell a story? We're getting there. We're doing some good stuff, but more and more people and companies tend to look and say, this is a superficial way to tell the same old story. In other words, okay, instead of, you know, doing a montage of this, we'll do a montage of social media posts. It's still the same thing. We haven't really gotten down into what is it like to live life through social media. Younger people are going to tell that story more. There's a great movie called Lurker. It's a great little indie film, but that's very much...
Yes, okay.
It's terrific. But there's lots of them. Lots of people are dealing with this. The industry as a whole is still looking at it as just decoration. We should be changing our art form to deal with our lives. And our lives are currently very technological.
What are the strengths and weaknesses of trying to go mainstream?
That's tricky because I'm having a hard time defining what mainstream is right now. When I was trying to go mainstream, it was the culture. It was like all of American society was focused on essentially movies, to a certain extent theater, a little bit TV. Over the course of my career, that moved to TV, but there was a unified center. Because of technological change, the truth is the audience has broken up. There's a lot of people who never watch movies, never watch TV. They'll watch YouTube and they'll play video games and they'll do Twitch streams, and there's a lot of different forms in which they are finding their cultural truth. So therefore, mainstream is now, there are some big entertainment companies doing big concert tours and big TV series, and those are okay, but I personally don't feel that's legitimately the mainstream anymore. It's just the big show. That doesn't mean it's the main, like I'm not sure that people are that invested in that stuff. But let's assume that we're going to believe in the corporate entertainment industry as the mainstream. And we're going to say, this is where things are. The strength of getting into that is A, get a nice big audience. B, in theory, you get a lot of money, although that is rapidly changing. What used to be a very, very well-paid corner of art has now become a case where the companies are increasingly trying to turn the creators into gig workers. Pay them as little as possible, keep them as uninvolved as possible, get their stuff and move on. And so therefore, it's no longer quite the sure thing it used to be in terms of making a living. And so I would say that's not one you can count on. Even if you get in the game, if you get in the big leagues and you're writing for a streaming series or you write a feature, you may not be able to build a career because of the way that things are changing contractually and business model-wise. So I am hesitant to say what my experience was once I was in the game, as long as I fed the machine what it was looking for, gave my talent to the things they were asking for, they would pay me a lot of money. They would often pay me a lot of money to provide the material that they would then throw out. That was their business model. They would say, let's get a whole bunch of writers to work on this and we'll pay them a fortune because we're going to take their stuff and wreck it. We're going to give it to other writers or we're just going to put it on the shelf. And the payoff is we may make a hit out of some of that. And the rest of it, they just get to live well. As the famous line in Mad Men, that's what the money is for. Don Draper says it when his assistant is saying, why aren't you paying more attention? You're taking my stuff and you're just paying me and then you're taking credit for it. He's like, that's what the money is for. That was my life. That life is no longer guaranteed in the business as it used to be. So therefore I would say the strength is you get a slightly better shot at the lottery if you're in the mainstream, and you may have a bigger audience at a certain moment, but there is less guaranteed longevity than there used to be. And I do believe people are still operating on the promise that that is what happens. You get in and you're safe. That is no longer true. So I would say the only real advantages are you get to play with some very, very high level people if you get in. That some of the best talent is up there. They are doing those mainstream projects, and the actors and directors, many of them are supremely gifted and knowledgeable, and you can't work with them without being in their game. But I believe there's plenty of supremely talented people who are not in the game, who have not managed to get in, and you can find them and you can work with them too. But as far as the mainstream, the big advantage is getting to operate with talent and, in theory, budgets and support greater than you would ordinarily have. The weakness is the number of pressures keeping you from doing your best are large. There's more people telling you to change things. There's more people who can change things against your will. You have to collaborate with more forces with different intents. And the idea that all people are going to get together and have some guidance towards one thing is a relatively rare occurrence. Most mainstream work is a sort of cobbled together hash of different intentions from different forces, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You're not necessarily getting the best of the best. You're getting the best of the best doing the best they can considering the complications. So the weakness is you'll probably have to sacrifice a great deal of your vision or style, even if you have the most commercial taste in the world. It is shocking how much, even if you are like like right on the edge of the zeitgeist, and you and the business are on the same page, you'll still run into some producers like, oh man, I think he should just, marry that one. And it's like, no, I know what I'm doing, I'm talented. And the answer is, you still have to deal with the fact that you do not have control in the mainstream, except for a tiny handful of extremely elite, lucky artists. Most people in the mainstream business, they're not getting to make choices. You look at actors and writers and like, why did they do that crappy thing? It's like, they needed a job. That was the one that was offered. You have no idea how little control people in the game have, because you'll read about Christopher Nolan, who can do whatever he wants. Out of, writers. There's like 12,000 writers in the Writers Guild, the union for writers in America, the best of the best, 12,000. Of those, the number of writers who can just say, this is what I'm doing and nobody's changing my work, maybe 3. The rest of us are just scrambling in a more intense game. I don't think people have a fairy tale version of what artistic success is. And that fairy tale is, once you are recognized as the great artist you are, you will be given all the support and all the love, and your inner self will be allowed to do what it wants. That is almost never, ever true, even among the greatest. If you read the biographies of Mike Nichols, some of the most talented, famous, powerful people in the world, and after a while, couldn't get done what he wanted to do, always. It's just how it happens. No one gets that fairy tale. And the press surrounding the media, frankly, is done by people who don't understand, either are selling the fairy tale because it's good business to sell, or they may have fallen for the fairy tale. They truly believe that when they interview someone, that they are talking to someone who gets to make all the choices they want. If you talk to them, if you talk to any artist about how many choices they are not allowed to make, almost all of them, big movie stars, famous directors, they'll say, yeah, I am working within the limits of what I am able to do, what I am allowed to do. I am not doing what I would do if I could make all the choices. That's the cool thing about not being in the mainstream. You don't get the money, you don't get the big audience, but you get to make exactly the things you want to make within your reality. If you can say, I'm going to work with what I have, you may not have the great lighting, you may not have the best music, you may not have the best actors, but if you can work with that, you can make something entirely yours and entirely magical. And you never know, people might like it and you might get a big audience. Because one thing I would add to that, look at the number of things in the mainstream that flop hugely, that no one goes to see. I was so lucky, I had success. I wrote some movies that were made by big companies and released with big movie stars. One of them, I was in a multiplex and I had seen a movie and I noticed that a movie I had written was at another theater. And I went in, I just snuck in, empty. There was not a single person watching. The movie was running to a completely empty theater, and it was kind of funny. I mean, it's the truth. Most seemingly surefire, successful stuff fails. I don't personally understand why everyone keeps thinking that the surefire is surefire. It's clearly not. Most mainstream stuff fails. So therefore, this delusion that everyone feeds each other that, oh, we know the formula to hit, If they knew the formula to hit, why are they releasing things that don't hit? Sometimes it's because you really believe in something and you say, you know what, we're going to gamble on this, which is what art is. I'm going to take a chance that other people like it. I would say that's 20%. 80% is we're following the formula. Gosh darn it, it's got to win. And it doesn't. Formula alone will never, ever win.
And now there's extraneous circumstances where if someone's biased toward an actor and their political views or what they said on social media 10 years ago, something that their mother's, father's, sister's helper did, and somehow it befalls them.
Yes.
So there's all these different things that come into play now.
Yes,
So,
and that's sort of the personal experience of art. Everyone comes to all art with their own vibes. There's certain actors, just like, I don't like them. But what's really disturbing is that if your great work is on a company that doesn't have the resources of a bigger company, so that if you're on some streaming service that is not one of the big five, you have no chance of large success. You simply do not have it because people can't watch it. Like, I know people who say, like, I had a show on XYZ streaming Thursday, and everyone will just say, I don't have that service. I can't watch it. I can't go to a store and buy a copy. I have to be a subscriber to that service. So therefore, some stuff, and I feel like Steven Soderbergh made a show called The Knick. It's great. It's phenomenal. It was on Cinemax. Cinemax doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It's fed into, it shows up on Max sometimes, and then they take it off for a while. But the whole point is, there was a moment there where HBO said, which owned Cinemax, said, let's try and, Cinemax was sort of their shabby genre stepchild. And then they said, let's try and put some great stuff on there. And Soderbergh said, hey, this will be cool. I'll be the artsiest thing on Cinemax. And he did, and it's marvelous. But imagine that it wasn't Cinemax, because Cinemax is still kind of alive. But what if it's a service that literally goes out of business? And that is happening, and that will continue to happen. And our belief that somehow these massive technological corporate entities are going to last forever, let's just remember the VHS tape. In my lifetime, the VHS tape rose and fell and vanished. And if you have a VHS tape, you can't watch it anymore. If you have a show on a streaming company that goes bankrupt because of some corrupt ownership, your work is lost forever. And I do not say this purely as a person who had a movie on Cinemax, but I did, and it's impossible to find now.
Do you even have a VHS?
No, I have a copy of it.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I can't do anything with it because legally I can't show it. But that's them's the breaks, that does happen. Actually, we were talking about Day of the Locust. It's a marvelous movie by John Schlesinger based in a novel by Nathaniel West. Nathaniel West was a very weird, artsy novelist. And after a while, he went to Hollywood to make a living. And he worked in Hollywood, and then he wrote a novel about Hollywood called Day of the Locust. Day of the Locust is a brilliant and very accessible novel. It was published in the depths of the Depression, like 1931 or 2. The publisher that was publishing it went out of business, literally like the month that it was published. And all the copies just sat on the shelves in the warehouse. It slowly got rediscovered about 30 years later, but the truth is, West had to just keep going on writing movies, and no one really knew about Day of the Locust for quite a while. It's always going to happen. The thing that try and remember is that the mountainous landscape of greatness that we all think, oh, I'm going to join the mainstream and get on the mountain and I will be safe and I will be eternal. Those mountains are going to fall. And when you get to be in your 60s and you've seen mountains rise and fall repeatedly in your lifetime, it gives you a certain sense of beware of mountains. They're beautiful, it's cool to climb them, it's great to be on top of them, but the idea that it's going to last forever is not accurate.
Nothing's too big to fail.
Yeah. There's certain movies, They Shoot Horses, Day of the Locust, that never come on streaming. And I suspect that there's some kind of contractual problem,
Oh, okay.
music rights or something, or sometimes there's a bunch of companies that came and went very fast, and all of their movies seem gone.
Oh, interesting.
And I think They Shoot Horses was one of those. Because They Shoot Horses is one of the greatest American films of the 20th century. And
I'm sure I've seen it. I gotta see it.
oh, it's amazing.
Okay, I'll have to see it. Sorry.
Oh my God. If you like Day of the Locust,
Okay.
They Shoot Horses, Don't They will blow you away. Jane Fonda, Michael Sarrazin, it's
Okay.
the dance marathon.
Okay, I gotta, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Sometimes
it's
it's
amazing.
so hard to keep up with everything.
Yeah, but it's very hard to find.
Let's suppose someone does feel insignificant in their creative work. What do you advise? If somebody says, why should I make anything? No one's going to see it. I'll never be big enough, quote unquote, to show it to a large audience.
I am a fan of embracing your insignificance, of saying, first of all, on a grand scale, we are all insignificant. I mean, Shakespeare, who was magnificent and significant, and is now increasingly inaccessible. The world has changed so much since Shakespeare's time that even though his stories, because they keep getting passed through the contemporary, and people share them in those senses, and they talk about them in a sort of mythic way. In other words, most people won't sit through a Shakespeare play, but they will understand. But the basic stories of King Lear or Macbeth, and the basic shape of that character's life, will inform other work, and people will refer to it, and that's sort of what's getting passed down. But the truth is, Shakespeare, at a certain level, is insignificant now. And that's the best, right? That's the best of the best. And yet, if you look back at like Edna Ferber was a best-selling author in the middle of the 20th century. She wrote the book that became the movie Giant with Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor. She wrote several huge bestsellers. She was a major person. I know that there is maybe 12 people in the audience right now who have ever heard of Edna Ferber, and she was significant at the time. It's simply the way of the world. So in that sense, give it up. And that's okay, because none of any of these artists who we revere were necessarily saying, we all want to be important and we want to be remembered, but the truth is they were doing the best they could in the situation they were in. And that's what you're doing, and that's the best anyone can do. And whether or not you are known to a large number of people or a small number of people, honestly, doesn't make that much of a difference. To you, like, you're never going to know your large audience. And if you get a small audience, which you can connect with, that's actually more satisfying. You hear about a lot of people who play stadiums, musicians who play a stadium, and they have to figure out, how can I perform to a group so large that I can't even see their faces? And that's a very different experience than sitting in a club and playing to a handful of people. There's a lot of wonderful rewards that come from the stadium, but it's not the only thing, and there's a price to be paid for that scale. The truth is, many, many people who do that either become kind of hollowed out performers or they quit and they go small and they do something else. You hear about a lot of artists who do that. They'll say, like, it wasn't fun anymore to be this gigantic performance machine, to be this thing that's operating at this grand scale. So just on a realistic scale, our beliefs about what would happen if we were significant, if we were important, if we were famous, those things are probably not accurate to what the experience of it is. Many, many people at the top of the game feel very, very insecure because they're afraid of losing that. And so therefore, it's not this dream state where you just be yourself and everyone loves you. So on that scale there, but then on the other scale, all you can do is what you can do. If you get significant, cool. If you get famous, great. But you don't work towards that. You work towards doing the work, and then the work either does or doesn't get lucky. And it is truly luck. I was a very talented person for 12 years as an office temp, and then I managed to get a foothold in the business. It was not like I suddenly got better. I did get better as I went along, but the truth is, I just got lucky. Somebody, the right person, read the right script at the right time for their allowing me into the game. If you wait until you are in, you'll never get in because they want you to do your work. They want you to bring your stuff. You have to do your stuff assuming that no one will ever care. To do the stuff that you believe in, do it the best you can, and if that's very commercial, cool. If it's very not commercial, cool. Do whatever it is that you believe in and put it out there. Show it to people. Show it to anyone you can. The examples I would use are like, if you made ceramics, first of all, there's very few famous ceramics people, but if there were, you would think that people would look down on the ceramics person who opens a little ceramics shop in their hometown or goes to a street fair, puts out a table and puts out their ceramics. That is what you need to do with your creative work. If that's writing, then put your scripts out on the internet. Don't worry, I have to work out a strategy for how I'm going to win over these people and you have to do it just this way. Just get it out there. Let people read it. If someone reads it, they might like it. Put stuff out. Make stuff you believe in. Put it out. That is the definition of the job. Significance is what happens when you do the job. You don't get to do the job if you haven't done it insignificantly already. And sometimes that's your whole career. Sometimes you have a community theater and you have 20 people, or you have a channel on YouTube that has 36 people watching. And you know what? If those 36 people comment and say, wow, that was cool, you win. You're good. And it's not impossible that someone with a production company will see that thing and go, it is cool, let's hire them to do our dumb thing. Fine. But if not, at least you did the thing. And it's your best shot. So be insignificant. Be happy being insignificant if you are doing work that you love and if anybody likes it.
I love that. And do you think there's just so much pressure, though, to not just do your art, but to be significant?
Yeah, there's an insane amount of pressure. It's crazy that, it's crazy but familiar to think that we are operating on the superficial level of the result. And the truth is, you can't create a result. You can create a work and it may or may not get the result, but you can't create the result. You can't write something as a hit. Everyone's writing a hit. Somehow or other, only some of them get to be hits. So clearly the answer is, the things that make something succeed are not within your control. You do the best you can, which can include saying, okay, Westerns are out and rom-coms are in. If I write a rom-com, I have a better chance of being picked up. You may choose to do that. On the other hand, if your heart is with Westerns, do the Western. Maybe you do 20 Westerns. Maybe only a little tiny company makes them. Or maybe things change and Westerns come back. Either way, you made the Westerns. If you make the rom-coms when you want to make the Westerns, at the end of the day, you look back and go, wow, I just wasted my life. I just wasted my life hoping that I would hit. Instead, do the best work you can and keep working on getting better. What you define as better. You looking at your own work, and hopefully you like some of it, but there's always a little challenge. Maybe it's, how can I put a rom-com into a Western? Whatever it is,
There you go.
You give yourself those little challenges and you make it interesting for you and you try, and you should want to do a movie that if it's in an empty theater, you still look at it and go, I'm glad I did that. Because most of the time, that is what is going to happen. I had a terrific 25-year career. I made money all the way through it. I got to do some real movies. I also wrote 12 unproduced spec scripts, which were my best. The ones I loved the most, couldn't get them made. I got hired to do other people's stories. I put my talent into that. I liked doing that, but I was still failing. I was still insignificant in that sense. If you're going to look at significance or worth as whether or not it got made by a big company, no, these didn't. I am currently putting them out on the internet. I am just saying, hey, anyone want to read these? because I wrote them, they're a good read. That's kind of success because a handful of people have read them and say, that was fun. Cool. That's the best anyone is promised.
And one thing too with being insignificant is then no one can criticize you, or not as many people can. You have a freedom to fail within your own terms.
Yes, the famous, there's several song lyrics which essentially say, when you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose, which is true. Yeah. If you are, doing handmade stuff, do the stuff that you love most, because it doesn't matter. Why not? Why not do something that at least you feel good about? Because sometimes when you do that, it will click with someone. And you can't be sure. You'll never know what will click. I wrote those 12 unproduced scripts at the same time I was writing scripts that were popular. I thought they would be popular. I didn't write anything that I was like, this is unmakeable. I wrote and thought, well, I wrote one that was unmakeable, but that was just a sample. It was like I was trying to get into TV and I wrote an unmakeable TV pilot. It was just going to be way too expensive. I just wanted something to open doors. But then then success was simply getting a meeting. And I got meetings. So it was a success, although it never got made. And I put it on the internet so people can read it. That's all you can do. Why not be you? Why not be you and do your thing, since you have no guarantee either way? There is no guarantee that anything will work. That is the way art goes. That is the way creativity goes. So therefore, at least do something that when it's done, you'll say, I'm glad I did that.
Glenn, your new book has come out, Writing for Screens, Skills, Tools, and Process for the Art of Screenwriting.
Yes.
Okay. And you have a chapter on why you should not write scripts. And I
Yes.
thought that was interesting. Does this surprise new writers?
I hope so. And at least somebody should tell them. There are things about screenwriting. Screenwriting is a very narrow, restricted, difficult art form. Just as a form, it's like haiku or something, in that the restrictions, because you are not allowed to talk too much about the internal workings of your characters, you are only allowed to work at a certain length, you are only allowed to use dialogue and scene description. There's certain things that limit it far more than other forms of creative writing. So that's the first level of frustration. The second level of frustration is screenwriting, because it is exclusively, or has been exclusively, an art form attached to a business. The business element is steering the creative, and that can be very frustrating. Whereas in many, like if you're doing something, if you're doing painting, while there is a business of painting selling, most painting is not in that business, and people just do it because they like painting or they like to see paintings. Very few people have up to now done screenplays because they like writing screenplays. They want to get in the business. However, in the past 20 years, we have reached a moment when for the first time, you can write and make and release a movie with no business, with nobody else involved. You can do it on your phone. And I think that has changed the definition of screenwriting. Screenwriting is not just a pre-professional thing. There is a path of pre-professional screenwriting into the business, and that's cool. But there's also a path of creative screenwriting in which you write and either you make it yourself or you find other low-budget indie filmmakers who are looking for a script and you give it to them and you work with them and everybody does it for no money and you put it out on the internet, and that's art and that's good. That just didn't exist until very recently. And so therefore, the concept of screenwriting has to change. It's not just how do I get in the business? It's do I want to get in the business, in which case I have to learn the business, or do I want to do filmmaking, which I can do within my means if I work within my means, if I work within the technological and creative circumstances I'm in, do whatever story and world you can do it. There's nobody stopping you. And screenwriting then opens up. And you don't have to have a happy ending, and you don't have to have a main character who does what the studio films do. You can do whatever you believe in, whatever you want to try and experiment. And I think that screenwriting has to be viewed as an art form which has a professional path. Just like if you were playing tennis. You can play tennis because you like playing tennis, and maybe you're pretty good at it, but you're not going to get to be a pro Wimbledon player. If you are going to be a pro Wimbledon player, that's a specific path and you have to do certain things to do it. But you can also just play tennis. And you can now just be a screenwriter who makes indie stuff and puts it out into the world. And as long as you're not expecting that to pay your rent, you're great. And it's taking a while, I believe, for the screenwriting community to recognize the two paths. And so what I was trying to do was say, this is a book for anyone who wants to learn how to do this art. Maybe you'll turn that to your professional focus, or maybe you'll just play with it.
So just like they say we have a K-shaped economy, there could be a K-shaped sort of artistic path.
Yes.
So some people may just want to go play pickleball at night with their friends or meet new people, and others, they want to be Venus or Serena.
Right.
So not everything, it doesn't have to be money driven.
Yes.
You know, because you often hear that like, why make that? You're not going to make any money from it.
Yes. And the other thing that I experienced personally is, even if you are talented and even if you are lucky, no matter what, when you get into the business, you are deeply, deeply required to compromise. And that is true of almost everyone. Almost every artist working in the business is scrambling to get a job, to get their work made. They're not just making choices and getting to do what they want, which is what every other artist gets to do. So yes, there is a professional path, but in that professional path, you are going to end up as an employee. The truth is, every screenwriter, at least in America, if you are working in the industry, you are an employee of a company. You sign over the rights to your work and they can take it away and they can rewrite it, or they can put it on a shelf and no one can ever read it. That is the price you pay for being in that game. You are an employee. And it is very hard for people who want to be an artist in that art form to recognize that that part of the art form is in fact a business first. It would be lovely, and sometimes that business decides to support art, but a lot of times it doesn't. And if you want to do the art, if you want to just play tennis as best you can, consider finding a way to do it that doesn't require the business to love you. The business's love is very fickle. So do something that you can do and do and do and do. And frankly, as far as I can tell, that's the best way to get into the business anyway. Because should you be lucky enough to use your talent and get a door open and get an opportunity to be in the business, you'd better have all of your skills and your process ready, because they don't want you to learn on the job. They want you to produce something that they can use for their purposes. Whereas if you just do 20 movies on your own, you'll just get good at it. It's like the Beatles were very, very talented, and then they went to Hamburg and they played 5 shows a night. 5 shows a night in a bar. And they said that's where they became the Beatles, where they became really good at their art form. They knew how to do it because they had to do it over and over and over again at very low stakes. Nobody cared. They were just really good in a crappy club in the red light district in Hamburg, and that's cool. Likewise in the Cavern Club. Steve Martin wrote an essay about when he was starting out. He worked at Knott's Berry Farm, which is a small family-owned amusement park, which back in the 60s was really family-owned. And he worked there as an entertainer in this big tent, and he did 5 shows a day doing comedy and magic. And he said that's where he learned the art. Because when you do 5 shows a day, you learn, first of all, you get your skills. You just get good at the stuff, the mechanics of it. You just get routine to the point that you can think about how you do it instead of thinking, am I doing this right? So do that with writing. Just write 5 shows a day in your mind. Do as best as you can to write a little bit every day. And we all have other things that are making demands on us, but just keep working on your own without worrying about the business. Get really good. Do your 5 shows a day for until you are so good that you can just put your stuff out there. Maybe someone will like it, maybe a handful will like it, and that's really satisfying too.
So, you hear the be so good they can't ignore you. But really, it seems like you should be so good that I'm just, this is just what we hear out there, but you should be so good that when they do point to say, you, come on, that you're ready and that there's no deer in headlights kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, the idea that things get rewarded because they are so good is inaccurate. Things often are good. Honestly, some things that are not that good get rewarded, get made, get to be hits. There's stuff out there that because it was on a certain trend or had a certain person involved who was very important at the time, and therefore we've all seen vehicles for various stars or personalities where it's just like, this is just terrible. That happens. The illusion of meritocracy is something that the business says in order to not feel bad about how much they are lying about it. Some things that are really great do not get made. Some things that are really bad do get made. It is very important to not identify your value by your recognition by a business which has other values. Famously, Matt Weiner, who made Mad Men, worked on The Sopranos. See, he was way up at the top of the game. He was in, and he wrote Mad Men, the pilot, while he was on The Sopranos, and he brought it to HBO. And HBO said, nah, not for us.
Oh, wow.
Okay, now he's at the best. He's got entree to everyone. For 7 years, he showed that script around to every company he could, and they all turned it down. So that script was unchanged from the version that was picked up by AMC. And part of the reason that AMC picked it up, aside from the fact that it was really good, was that it was a period piece, which turned everyone else off. But AMC was used to showing old movies, so their audience liked period pieces. So all of a sudden, the thing that was a disadvantage became the one element that AMC was like, oh, this is cool, we're good with period pieces. And Mad Men, now the script did not change. He said, I did not change the script at all when we made it. There was 1 or 2 notes, but other than that, it was the identical script that had been rejected for 7 years by someone in the top of the business. The answer then is there some magical goodness in a script that makes it go? No. It's luck. It's that AMC happened to be starting then and they had nothing to lose. They're like, let's take this really talented guy and this really offbeat thing because we're starting out a channel and nobody knows who we are and we can do whatever we want. And that's how Mad Men happened. Mad Men was that good 7 years before and it got totally neglected.
For your new book, Writing for Screens, was there a chapter that was particularly hard to write?
I feel like the whole thing was really hard to write because I had thought about teaching screenwriting. I think every screenwriter at a certain point goes, I'd better learn how to teach because I can't make any money. Because you're always afraid that you're going to stop getting jobs. So right around after the financial crisis of 2008, which also coincided with the Writers Guild strike at the same time, I had some jobs that kept me going for a couple of years, that the contracts were made before the downturn. So I kept going for a while, but then things started to slow down and I was like, I'd better learn to teach. I went to UCLA Extension and I taught a couple of classes there, which was a really cool experience. And I had to formulate my thoughts for the classes. So I formulated them in terms of not a book, but in terms of a series of classes. And I had all these notes that I had made to myself over my learning, where I'd said like, oh, this is, remember, this is how story works, or remember, this is how characters are, whatever it was. I would just jot down notes to myself. I used them as the material for those classes. then I managed to keep working, so I stopped teaching. But I was like, I should do something with this material, with these ideas. But I just didn't want to do a book that was like every other book. Everybody writes a screenwriting book now. There's way too many screenwriting books. But I began to really like the idea of communicating these thoughts. I felt like my experience was different than what the books were saying. And I got invited to go to the Austin Screenwriting Conference in 2019. And I just had to do a couple of sessions there. And it was so exciting. It was fabulous. I love the Austin Screenwriting Conference is great. And I left there saying, you know what? I'm going to teach. I'm nearing retirement age. I'm going to teach. And I thought, well, when you teach, the way you do it is you start these seminars and you write a book. It's like there was like a routine on how you do it. And I just thought, I'm just going to be yet another guy doing the exact same thing as everyone else. And I happened to have spent a lot of time watching YouTube because I had written a thriller called Like, Share, Follow, which was about a YouTuber who gets into a fatal attraction situation with a fan. And so I just had been deeply engaged in YouTube, and I thought, that's where I want to teach. I don't want to do a book. I want to do a YouTube channel and just put the lessons into YouTube. I think I'll reach a lot more people, and they can come and go as they please instead of having to go to a seminar that I have. And so I can get out there more, and I'll just have a different form. And I just wanted a different form. So I spent a while learning how to shape a lesson for YouTube. So I spent a couple of years developing these little 10-minute videos, which I made. There's 50 of them on my channel, Writing for Screens. I did that, then I was doing it for about a year, and I came to you.
Or I think we came to you.
No, I came to you. I cold called you. I emailed you and said, hey, can I be on? Because I only had 36 subscribers when I came to you. Nobody knew about me. Nobody. I was way under the radar. But I was churning out a weekly lesson that I had spent months and years writing, these, like solidifying my thoughts. And I do want to emphasize that. People talk about content and the feed, and we should just keep feeding the stuff and getting it out there. That's bad. It is bad to feed. Good thoughts don't, if you have a good thought and then you need another good thought tomorrow and another good thought tomorrow, people are going to forget the good thought. It's just not good for us to have quite so much constant churn. My opinion, obviously, it's better business to churn the feed, but I just spent a couple of years creating 10-minute lessons. And when I got them to where I really believed in what I was saying, and I thought I was saying it in a way that I could comfortably say, I put them out there. That took a whole year. And then I came here and I did a video with you. I did an interview with you guys, and I started to get followers. And I got 20,000 people who are watching or subscribing to my channel. I don't think they're all watching it. But that went on for a couple of years. It was really exciting, this new form, no books involved. And then I started to say, I really said it. I worked really hard to say that. I don't want to keep saying it. I've already said it. That it will actually diffuse the purpose of the point. The value of these lessons was that I had worked really hard to get them to say what I meant. So what I thought was, I got to stop. And so to sort of close it out, I made the book. I made the lessons out, I made the videos into the book. I took all the scripts from the videos and I rethought them. I took them out of script format, which I had done for myself to perform, and I put them into paragraphs and I began to rewrite it and I formed it into a book. And I really liked the idea that the book should be like the videos, no system, no, you have to follow this and do this and this. It's just like, here's a thought, here's a thought. These are the best thoughts I have on this topic, dialogue, character, whatever it is. I ended up having 100 chapters. Each one is just a little, it's a thought.
In the book, can you show the book?
Yeah.
So there's 100?
There's 100
chapters.
There's 100 short chapters. Some of them are just a page, some of them are 5 pages.
Great. Love it. Beautiful.
And I realized that's the book that's the book I believe in. I don't believe you should have, my thoughts are, take this tool, this idea, this thought, and try it out for yourself. You don't have to follow a plan. Here's the thing, try doing your dialogue this way, try shaping your scenes this way, try doing your outlines this way. Each one is just a thing. If you're interested in dialogue, you open it up, look for the dialogue chapter, see what it's got to offer you. If not, if you want to read through the whole thing, great. I love everything that's in there, but I don't want anyone to feel, I can't write until I've read this whole thing. You can write now. You can write with whatever you've got. If you've come to the point where you want to write a script, that means you love this art form. And you've absorbed a fair amount of it. And the basics are really basic. The script format is actually very simple, and it keeps you very stuck to what people say and what people do and where and when they are, and you move on. And so that's all you really need to know. If you know that and you've watched a bunch of stuff and you have things in your mind, write it in script form. And then yes, keep learning. Always, every artist is constantly learning and exploring and studying while they work. You don't learn and then work. You work, and then when you come up to something you don't know, you learn that, and then you keep going. And so I wanted a book that worked that way. So that's the book I made.
So just as you advocate for writing in scenes, screenplays,
Yes.
you wrote your book in chapters. You kind
Yes,
of, okay.
and in fact, I didn't think of them as chapters at first. I thought of them as lessons, a thought, a little essay, a little point to think about. And then I said, oh, that could be a chapter. If you think of a chapter as just a short thing that gives you some information, kind of like a cookbook. So to get back to the original question, was it hard to write? The answer is, yeah, it was, I couldn't think of a book. I could only write it at all by saying, I need to find a whole new art form, YouTube videos, which, most people don't even think of that as an art form, but it is.
It is, yeah.
And I thought, how can I master the art of helpful, educational YouTube videos? And once I had that, the expression allowed me to turn it into a book. But it took years and years of crafting them in another form because the book was too hard. So the answer is, was it hard to write the book? Incredibly. But once I had the scripts, it was easy. I just fixed them.
Well, this might apply to what you're talking about here, because you've also said that creating should not be dependent on your mood. It creates the mood. Did you feel the same with writing the book?
Yes, although I sort of had to learn that to be a professional screenwriter, which is if you learn the process, if you work out a process that works for you, that is different for everybody. Some people work better at night, some people work better in the day. Whatever it is that is productive and healthy for you, that ends up getting stuff done, you get that to the point where no matter what, you can start that process and the creativity will come. So you start to get a feeling of, I don't have to feel creative. I have to open the document and the creativity comes from that process. I really don't know if there's a handful of artists that just wait until the right moment and then blah, it comes out. Most artists work out some form of ritual process, some repetitive, mechanical form that they work in. I know some people who write by hand on yellow pads and then type it. I personally work on the computer, but I have a set of documents that I always format, a notes and an outline, just the way that it works for me. And what I would say is the thing that everyone has to learn is what works for them. And the only way to find that out is to try it, and then to try another way and try another way until the ways that work will feel better. And then after a while, you get to where the creativity shows up when you sit down to do the work. You don't have to worry about feeling it all. It's gonna come if you perform the process. And that's very much came from method acting. Not that I'm an actor, but I was trying to learn how to direct, so I learned about acting. And one of the things they basically say is, you can't control the performance. You have a series of steps you take where you study the character or you analyze the script or you jump around in a circle, whatever it is that makes that work for you, so that when you say those words that you've memorized, a feeling attaches to them. It comes out. And that same thing I think is true of every creative work, even scientific creativity. You get a comfort with the mechanics. You do the mechanics even when they're bad, and you do them over and over every day for years. And eventually, the mechanics are so familiar and comfortable that you start to get better at the content, for lack of a better word, for the truth of them, the feeling of them, the creativity of them. It comes out of being so familiar with the mechanics that you don't think about the mechanics, you just do it and it happens.
And so when you were a temp, did the mood strike you when you would get back? I know they would strike you on the job, but isn't that always how the sort of the muse shows up, is when you can't do something?
Yes.
And it's like psychological, like, I want to be doing this right now, and you can't. But when you would get home, was the muse still there?
Part of my process had to become, first of all, I would just open the document, put the paper in the typewriter, even though I didn't necessarily feel anything. I was like, I've got 15 minutes free, I'd better do something now. And then sometimes I would just write notes, or I would write the bad version, whatever it was. That became my process. Stealing a bit of time at somebody else's office. That was the work process for a long time for me.
Were you answering phones, maybe between
Yeah,
phone calls?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
there you go.
And it was, but the main thing was just say, okay, at least put the paper in the typewriter. At least think, what scene am I working on, or what step of the process? Maybe I'm making an outline. Okay, today I'm making an outline. Put the paper in the typewriter and figure out what's in an outline. Scenes. How many scenes have I got already? What scenes don't I have? Let me write something about the scenes I don't have. And then you fill it up and then you go, oh, that scene would move around or whatever. But the process of saying, I'm going to perform this mechanical act with the intention of creating this thing that I understand because I want to make a movie, I'm going to write a movie script, it's in this form, that allowed, eventually I would be like, oh, I thought of something. But I thought of it because I was sitting at the typewriter. Of course, then I had to go Xerox, and while I'm Xeroxing, I also think of something, and then you just grab a pencil and paper and you scribble it down and you go back and you type it. Part of my process now is I open my document, I do whatever step of the work is, and then I stop. Because you're right, the creativity, for me, I get intense, I get it, and then I feel a feeling of like, I'm just sort of faking it now. I stop, take a walk, make a sandwich, take a shower, and then yes, the creativity comes back and then you go back to it. I needed to do something where I start and stop a lot. That was just me, that's how my brain works. Other people, they need to ramp up, like they need to work for an hour till the magic hits. You'll know that how you feel, you'll know.
And hence that becomes your process.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be like this huge ritual, just know how you work is what you're saying.
No one has the same process as anyone else. Everyone partakes of pieces of other processes or pieces required by the art form, but everyone's process is personal. It's not right or wrong. It either helps you or it doesn't. If it doesn't help you, keep trying until you find stuff that does help you.
And I think that's what's wonderful about your teaching style from watching your videos is I feel that you're being fair and that you'll tell me if something is wrong, but you won't berate me for it. And I think that's why you've also garnered an audience.
Who likes that?
Well, but some people resonate with tough love a little more than others. But I think that's that's why you've attracted so many viewers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think part of it is the people who are berating are kind of operating out of fear, in the sense that they're thinking, this is a hard business, which it is. It's very competitive. And so they're saying, I've got to push this person to face this hard thing, which I know is really, really scary. You're going to have a hard time. I don't operate well out of fear. I don't think anyone does. And so therefore, I think that saying to someone, you're going to get to something scary. It's going to happen. The best thing you can do when you're facing that scary thing is to be really comfortable with the thing you're doing, to be really good at it and enjoy it whether or not they like it. Because then if they don't like it, you can go, well, so-and-so liked it, I liked it. And so my way to deal with fear is not to say, how can I please them? What can I do? But to say, how can I do the thing that I think is best and hopefully they will like it? That's really, as far as I can tell, the best way to be creative. And I hate to say best, but I do think it is best. So yeah, people teach often out of fear or out of a formula. And so teachers will berate the students because they're not fitting a formula. And I guess partly because I'm just a really hungry audience for a lot of different things. I like comedies and I like tragedies. I like all sorts of different high and low art. And so therefore, I can't say there's a formula that I believe in. I like weird art films and real Hollywood films. And so I don't want somebody to tell me there's one right way. And so I believe that you should say to everyone, you choose your form. There's not a right or wrong form, and certain forms are more popular than others, but you're choosing it because you like it, because you believe in it.
You know, we talked earlier about wanting to live in the world of the movie. That's when you know you really loved a film. Is there any screenwriter's career that you would love to have lived in that world?
Yes. But the thing about that, and this took a while for me to learn, the one most important thing of all the influences that you're absorbing is to recognize that you have to take their thing that you're absorbing and do your version of it, because you can't do theirs. Like, yes, I mean, Billy Wilder, Patty Chayefsky, so many, those two are like marvelous writers. Tom Stoppard, who just passed away. Their work, I don't want to live their life, but I wish I could have lived in that time. I think that the thing that happens is that you sort of absorb what you love about that, and in theory, often you're just doing your version of theirs. You're like, ooh, how can I do my take on The Apartment? I'll never do The Apartment. The Apartment is an ideal movie. However, I can do a story about a couple who have these, things that are going on in their lives, or I can do an office romance, or I can do, like, there's many elements to that I love. And I'm like, how can I do, what would mine be? And like, oh, mine might be about an office temp because I was an office temp. And then all of a sudden it's a new thing inspired by the thing you love. And that's not stealing, that's art.
Do they even have temp? Because I've worked at many. I don't even know if they have temp.
Not so many
agencies anymore.
They have temp agencies.
They do, okay.
But it's not what it was. And that's, I guess, one of the main things that people say, like, how did you get to where? I got to be where I am because I was in a place at a time where the thing I could do there was a door to get in. But that door is gone. The entire structure is gone of the business that I got into, the way I survived. At the time, I was living in the East Village in New York, and my rent was $600. And that is insane now. So the answer is, how would you do it? Well, I wouldn't do that because I can't afford that now. And would I be a temp? No, I'd probably be some form of gig worker or, because that's the equivalent.
Right. But you took the typing test?
Yes, luckily because I had been typing since I was a kid, because I wanted to write, I got a typewriter. I never knew how to touch type. So my typing speed had a limit because I couldn't look, like I had to, I didn't know how to properly type, but I was real fast in my own wacky way. So I could get about 60 to 80 words a minute.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was there was a threshold.
I had a friend, though, who was also a temp, and they had learned actual touch typing where there's a whole method, and they could do 120.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why do you say that AI is a lie?
Almost everything that is promised about AI is not currently true, and there is no real indication that it will be true. The companies that are serving us our technology frequently operate from theory. And I guess the best way I can explain this is GPS, which is a miracle. On the other hand, if you put into your phone how to take a certain path in a place that you know well, you will often see that the GPS actually is going a bad way. There may be speed bumps they don't know about, or they just may be hard to make a turn. And the thing is, everyone keeps saying, well, the GPS will learn that. But at least in the past many years, the truth is still, the GPS does not always know the best way. They know the mathematically most probable way. So therefore, the idea that GPS is telling you the best way is, if you're going to name it, it's a lie. It is not true. It is theoretically a good way, and statistically it may be, but the truth is we don't live in statistics, we live in the real world. AI is promising, first of all, it's promising to become conscious. Whether or not that is true, it certainly is not true now. So all it really is probability, statistics. Statistically, people will like this sentence. That is the exact opposite of what an artist does. What an artist does is make choices. Making art is making choices. There is not a right or wrong art. There is not a better or worse art. There are people who have certain values and therefore like types of art, but what the artist must do is say, among these many choices, I choose this one. Now, an algorithm can choose based on whatever values were put into it, which are generally popularity. But most art is not guided towards exclusively popularity. Most art that is exclusively guided towards popularity is pretty bad. The truth is that most art in some way breaks a rule, does its own thing. That is why we like it, because it is original or unexpected. If it was simply churning out the very, very same thing all the time, we would actually stop calling it art. We would call it, some kind of stimulation. But art conveys some form of creativity, making a new thing out of old pieces. AI currently is not doing that. It has been promised that it will, and maybe it will, but at least at the moment, it's not doing what they said. And if it were to do that, if it were to actually become creative and conscious and all these other things which could be very bad for humanity, but leaving that aside, just artistically, why would you want it to do that for you? That's like saying, I want to be a writer. I'm going to take my idea. I want to write a story about this. AI could write the outline for me and then I could write it. That's the exact equivalent of me saying, I want to write this story. Would you do the outline for me and come back to me and then I'll write it? What kind of artist does that? What kind of artist says, I don't really want to do the art, I just want to have done it? While every artist in the world says that, the truth is if you took it away from it, if you said, we can feed your desire into a machine and it will come out with a work of art and you put your name on it, very few honest artists would say, that's the plan I want to do. They want to work the work and make the stuff out of themselves. And while there are tools that are useful, if you want the AI to tell you 47 possibilities for the next scene, sure, you can do that, but you've got that in your head. And if it comes from your head, it's more likely to be good art because it's coming from a consistent place. If it comes from the AI, it's coming from a conglomerated version of a lot of other things and then A/B tested to what's popular, which means it's not yours. And if you like something that's popular, it'll already be in your head. You don't need the AI. I just honestly feel that very few uses of AI help you make art. The truth is, it helps you do the business, it helps you skip steps, but skipping steps is not the goal. Once again, it would be like if you were playing tennis. You said, okay, but I'm really bad at serving. Can I have the machine serve for me? Well then yes, but you're not playing tennis. You are doing a part of tennis and you're having a machine do part of tennis. And if you really like tennis, that feels bad. And the odds are, even if you were to win playing tennis that way, would you be able to take that credit and say, that's my win? I don't personally think so. I do recognize that it can be an interesting tool. The only thing I would say is that you do not ask tools to make your choices for you. You don't put your food on the stove and say, stove, decide what I want for dinner. You say, I'm going to make some chicken, and then you use the stove to cook it. Cool, that's a tool. Having it decide for you is some other thing than a tool. I don't entirely know what to call it, but whatever it is, I believe it makes for bad art.
I could say that if, let's suppose, ceramics, so the fun of ceramics is having the wheel right there and getting your hands in the clay and it's wet and it's just mushy. But what if you don't know, well, if I put the kiln at this level, there's ways that you can ask it questions that could help the art.
Absolutely.
But not maybe do it for you.
Right, but that would be a book. I mean, in that case, the AI is simply the equivalent of a good reference book. In other words, you're turning to the AI and saying, hey, you've read 50 ceramics books and you're going to tell me the majority of them say this is the temperature to use. Cool, but you're not going to say, what should I make, a cup or a plate? Because that's not a reference book question. That's a question of choice. And that choice only makes sense from you. You could ask it, if I'm trying to sell plates, what color plate is most popular at the store? Right. However, most artists don't just want to make whatever's popular and will sell. They want to make whatever inspired them to like plates in the first place. And there will have been plates that you saw or ate of that meant something to you. And if the AI says, that's not a popular plate, a good artist would say, that's the plate that matters to me. That's the plate I want to make. And maybe I'm going to sell less.
I guess you could say then it's inspiring people that don't have an artistic streak or writerly sort of bent to be able to do things.
Absolutely. So. If that is a completely legitimate use of essentially maybe a toy, maybe a tool. But the point is, yeah, like if you want to have something make a song for you and you don't have talent at writing a song, but the point is there's a certain question of like, at what point, if you don't have a talent or an interest in pursuing a thing, why are you doing that thing? that I guess that's the question. And there may be legitimate points at which you're saying, I just want to do a little of it. Great, use AI, absolutely. But then honestly, you're less of an artist. And I feel awkward saying that, but I would say that you're more of an artist to do a bad job by yourself. That when you're making plates, if your first 1,000 plates are wobbly and not circular, that is still more fun and better. And in theory, you're going to spend, like, if you love an art form, if you like to do the thing, you're going to be like, look, this plate is slightly more round than the last plate. I'm winning. It's good.
Right. I mean, you could say that, and I know this is not the case, but it seems as if there's an element of magic involved, and I know there's not. It's a culmination of different things that are in the sort of the online and things like that. But there is an element of like this. I'm going to put this in, and poof, I'm going to get a rabbit out of a hat.
Yes.
And I think that part is enjoyable. It's novel to us now. What AI has only been around 3 years in terms of certain
it's a
programs.
Blast.
Yeah.
It is extreme. Like I said, it's honestly, to me, that's a toy, a really great toy, and I like toys. So I'm not saying that in a bad way, but I'm saying it's very different from an art medium. And doing art is very different from playing with toys. And I'm not saying that playing with toys is bad. I'm saying if you want to be an artist, it is only satisfying to do the art. And it's hard because you're never good when you start. But in theory, at least some little part of it will be fun, or at least interesting or challenging. And that's why you do it.
Right. And are there any pros to using AI? Not pros writing, but are there any pros and cons? Are there any pros to using AI?
I personally do not think so. I personally think that if you are using it as a reference tool, in other words, you can go to the library and look stuff up, or you can ask AI to look it up, to a certain extent, sure, why not? But the problem is, currently at least, the way AI is being built, it's not giving you good answers. Much of what it says is not true. Much of what it says is based in things that are online. There is a great deal, despite the mythology, there is a great deal of knowledge and stuff that is not online. And I know this from doing research on a historical novel I'm writing. I keep running into these art history books that are not online in any form. They're just books on a shelf in a library. If all of those were in the database for AI, I would say great. But currently, you're not actually getting what they're promising. It is not sweeping all of knowledge. There are lots of pictures that are not online. There are lots of movies and music that are not online. And AI should be one place you look, but you should also look at those other places.
Let's suppose somebody who loves Chopin or Beethoven said, when the synthesizer came, the piano is gonna be done. But those two can coexist. So
that's, once again, if you were looking at AI as an instrument, as a tool, that was the point of a synthesizer was it made noise in a different way than a piano. A piano hit a string, a synthesizer connected some circuits, but they both made a noise. How you make the noise and what you do with the noise, that's the art. The synthesizer is just a tool.
Okay.
To the extent that AI is doing something for you, like that synthesizer in making the noise, that's great. But the minute you say, make me a melody, you're taking the noise and the creativity and giving it both to the AI. So what I would say is, yes, to a certain, for instance, if you wanted to make a movie, an animated movie, and you can't animate, it's too hard. So you say to the AI, make an animated movie and you script it and you give it and it makes the animation. To a certain extent, that is legit if you are claiming you wrote it, but if you're saying you animated it, you are lying. You are saying you are taking credit for something that something else did. And that thing would be just as much as if you wrote an animation script and sent to an animation studio in another country and said, here, I'm gonna pay you this amount of money, animate it, and then you brought it back. If you say, I wrote this, I sent it to a factory, they made it, here it is, cool. But people are saying, I made that. I made it with AI. That to me is inaccurate because you didn't do the work of the animation. So if you wanted to say, I wrote a script and then I had AI animate it, great.
Okay, could prompts be a new art form?
Sure. The problem is the control of the mechanism that is giving back the responses to the prompts. In other words, yes, you can ask that, but once again, that would be like saying to a person, what would you do if you were in an empty room and it was filling with water? Okay, so you say that and that person would run through the possibilities in their mind and they would choose by their values and they would say a thing. That's exactly what they're saying AI does. The point, once again, is when did it become part of writing to go up to a stranger whose values you don't know and whose values are being operated by a company that won't tell you how they're doing it, and saying to them, room full of water, what do you do? And then they give it back and you say, and you take what they did, to a certain extent, you're not writing.
Okay, that's fair. And it does tend to agree with you.
Yeah,
That is the one thing.
Yes, yes.
It's your personal yes person.
I do not, I'm not saying that the technology could not be crafted in such a way as to be much more useful. It still could not be creative, but it could be a great tool. The problem is currently, it is not being offered that way. It is being offered in ways that stimulate engagement and keep people coming back on a very, very consumer level. But we're not being consumers, we're trying to be creators.
Sure.
And that's different, and the AI is not built to help that. It could be, and it should be, and if it was, that would be a legitimate tool. Currently, it is not.
Right. Well, just as we've kind of rebelled against social media at times and putting our lives online in certain ways, maybe AI will have its peak and then people rebel against certain parts of it. I don't know.
I still use GPS. I just don't believe in GPS. I recognize that GPS is making a statistical suggestion, and it probably is good. But if I have knowledge, I add my knowledge and I operate. In other words, that's what I'm saying. It's a tool. It has limits. It has strengths. Know that it's a tool and that much of the algorithm is a black box. It is even a black box to the people who make it. And black box means they don't know how it's doing what it's doing. That's disturbing, but it is scientifically stated. There's a lot of people working on the algorithms that run AIs that are saying, we don't actually know how it's doing that. That's troubling. It's not that it's not a valuable tool, but just like GPS, if all you do is follow the GPS, also, if everyone's using the same GPS, they're all going to be on the same street. That street is not going to be the best way to go because there's going to be too many cars on it. Likewise, if everyone's going to AI and saying, what's a good story? It's going to continue to narrow down to a single most popular or most valued thing. It's the exact opposite of art, which is, I've heard that, I want to do something a little different, because that's a big part of art. Otherwise, we would have had a work of art that finished art. The whole point of art is that that's not how it works, that there's no right art. There's different art for different times and different moods and different people, and what you want is a whole lot of different art that came from different people. So if AI is the creator, it's eventually just going to be boring.
You know, I love some of these documentaries on these savants who do these recreations of these paintings. Mm-hmm. There's been several of them, and sometimes they dupe these curators, and then these curators buckle down and say, I'm going to find them. And in some ways, there's an element of that. Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe,
sure.
But with that, it's still a human being, you know, and you think if you could do a replica of the Mona Lisa, why wouldn't you want to just attempt to do your own version of something else? Why try to do, I get it, because they want to try to get some type of money.
It's simply a different skill. I wouldn't say that making a precise copy of a work of art is art. I would say it's a skill, it's a talent, it's a craft, it's a beautiful thing. I'm not saying it's bad to do. I would differentiate that from anything creative. Any form of creativity, even if it's stick figures, is art. But if all you are doing is imitating another thing, to me, it is, I guess, art without creativity. And I'm not sure that that's art. It's craft, like I said, and it's skill. And I'm not saying it's not those things and those aren't amazing, but it differentiates from the one defining factor of art, which is you're making something that didn't exist before. Even if it's using a lot of other stuff, that particular version, it's yours in that moment as best you can.
So maybe there could be this new curriculum is AI and philosophy put together, rights and wrongs. You know, it'll start its own.
As a tool, in theory, if it was being molded to be really, really precise and honest, if it was willing to say, this is an approximation based on these sources, there's all sorts of ways to make it a phenomenal tool. None of that seems to be operating right now. And that's too bad, because it's a cool technology. There's nothing wrong with it.
It's definitely cool.
The problem is not the technology, it is the people making and running the technology.
Right. Well,
in my opinion.
As the chef says, I don't know what I put in my sauce. It just,
Yeah.
probably does know, but yeah. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.